Well, hello, everyone. It's Dr. Marilyn Clark again of the Lead Seat. And today I have two wonderful guests with me. My first guest is Khalid El-Amin. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And Khalid has nearly 10 years of professional experience in talent development, being in a junior role as an HR analyst in corporate America before joining various Big Four and MBB consulting firms. He is currently a manager with Alvarez and Marcel and aims to bring cohesive and efficient project teams while also embracing individuals' diverse needs and desires to garner a team success. Khalid looks at himself as a person-centered people leader. So welcome, Khalid. And my second guest is John Powell. John is currently an executive coach, which he would describe as the capstone of his career. After a degree in psychology, he began working in management consultant, earned a MBA, and has spent the last 35 years with several of the world's largest global consulting firms. John's consulting work revolved around supporting clients through transformations, from new strategic initiatives to operating models to enterprise software implementations. He recently retired from Ernst & Young after 15 years, allowing him to focus on his coaching and development. John is a certified coach who graduated from the Hudson Institute of Coaching in 2020. He works with executives who are facing complex business challenges, career transition, or are eager to build on their success and continuing professional and personal growth and development. John is a lifelong learner and loves to participate with like-minded individuals and communities. In his spare time, he travels with his wife, plays tennis and piano. Welcome, John. And just to let you know, I am also a pianist. I've been studying since the
Nice.
third grade. I was a music minor, yeah, and I still study, and and I also do a little theory. I'm also starting to go back to the theory because I've been away from it for I don't know how many years. So I bought me a book on theory, and I said, you know what, I just want to do that again, kind of work on some theory. So welcome, John.
Thank you.
All right. So today, what we're going to talk about, our subject is old age and new age leadership. What is old age and new age leadership? So who would like to start off?
I can kick us off.
Okay.
So, in my perspective, I would consider old age leadership to be a little bit more directive, kind of like top-down leadership, where you have a decision that is made by an individual or a collection of individuals who have more seniority within the organization, and then those decisions funnel down to middle managers, and middle managers determine the best way to implement, and then they'll just direct it to their teams, right? So just here's what you need to do, not necessarily indicating why it needs to be done this way, but we have our marching orders. We're letting you know what our marching orders are, and here's what it means for you. Conversely, I think the new age leadership is a little bit more collaborative, where or the organization has a vision of what needs to be done. However, it's upon the team to identify what the solution could be, how to best implement that solution, and move forward. Right. So it gives a lot of ownership to both mid managers and the individual contributors of the team.
Mm-hmm. John, what are your thoughts?
So I think the context is important here, and the context for companies has been changing for some time. I mean, during my entire career, the social contract for companies, between the companies and employees, has been shifting a little bit, and it continues to do that. And then I'm sure we'll touch on this as we go on, but in COVID, it took a huge change, a step change. And I think that if I had to sum it up, the general movement is from the head to the heart. It's very slowly, but when I first started working, as Khalid said, it was sort of it was a little bit more command and control. It was more directive. And somewhere in the last 35 plus years, the heart has come into the equation a bit. We talk about purpose. We talk about people being able to bring their whole selves to work. And so I think, to me, just to, kind of top line it, the new age leadership is about how we manage in that, how leaders manage in that environment where people are trying to bring more of themselves to work. At the same time, we're seeing a bit of change, maybe even disintegration of the social contract that existed before,
Mhm.
perhaps about having a lifelong career with a single company, which has obviously changed. So that's what I see going on.
Okay. Well, I just like to throw my 2 cents in because leadership for years has really been my soapbox. And so when I was coming through, it was more like John said, more of the top down kind of leadership. But I always had a problem with um, leadership being defined as you had to have certain traits. And I always felt that everyone has some type of leadership trait. It could be my example for that is thinking in your childhood, is there anything, when was the first time you ever thought you were a leader? And people are really amazed when they go back. I had a client one time that said, well, I used to have to take care of my siblings because I was the oldest. Well, you were leading. And so while her parents were working. So that's why I'm saying it's so holistic to me. And so that's why I came through the old age, but I definitely see the new trends coming. It's exciting. I think that, and has a lot to do with the way we work post-pandemic. I agree with that.
For
Okay.
sure.
Um, the first thing I want to talk about today is digital savvy leadership. So we're definitely in a digital age. It became more predominant through the pandemic and how we had to shift and change in order to lead our teams. So let's discuss how new age leaders leverage technology and digital platforms to lead, innovate, and manage remote teams versus the old age leaders who may have always relied on the face-to-face interactions and the traditional communication methods. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, let me start with the old age perspective, because I feel like I've kind of gone through this. There's a lot of work that I believed needed to be done in person. And if I didn't see it for myself, I wouldn't have believed it could be done
Mhm.
virtually. And so to me, the technology, especially when it first started coming out with Teams and Zoom, was something that I could put up with, but not something that I thought about taking advantage of. And there's, and I believe we're caught kind of still in this place where we, we're trying to create this feeling of being all together and being synchronous, but
Mhm.
it still feels asynchronous to me because we have to take turns. And I know there's a lot of technologies, Mira and other things that can help us collaborate in real time. Um, but I find it still an approximation of being in person. And one example would be just room for silence, where if you're sitting in a conference room with a whiteboard where people are staring at the whiteboard thinking, and I feel like that's not as much part of a kind of a virtual experience. So those are just some thoughts.
Mhm.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. I think that, you know, COVID was a blessing and a curse, particularly in the workspace, um, because I've now gone through probably about half, a little bit less than half of my professional career in a post-COVID environment, or during COVID or post-COVID environment. So I've experienced uh, the legacy, whiteboarding, coming up with ideas, brainstorming in a room. I've also experienced the early days of what are your ideas, present them via email, and then we'll refine them individually. And I've gone through the Miro route, where it's a collective whiteboard and folks are able to collectively work through a solution. um, I think that we are closer together than we've ever been, but we're also further apart than we've ever been with this environment. Because when you have the ability to look across the room and see somebody, see their reactions, see their facial expressions, all of those things, you can pick up on nonverbal cues, right? You can't do that with a project management system that everybody's sharing, right? It's just, what are the inputs? Like, you don't see the revisions of the input. You just see the final result. And it's a lot less personable. So I personally think that we're closer together because we have accessibility to our teams more than we've ever had. But I think that there is something to having the ability to, see somebody in a room, have that experience, and also be able to detach, right? And to see the iterations and see the revisions happening in real time. So I think that it's a blessing and a curse. But to John's point, it is, it's an accelerator, but it can't be the only form of collaboration. I think that there is something to, pulling out a whiteboard, or asking the questions, or having the space to ask the questions. It's a lot easier to do when you're in person. You're able to tap somebody on the shoulder and say, hey, what does that mean? Versus, having to put yourself out there, put it in a message like, hey, I was kind of stuck at this point. Can we go back over this? So yeah, I think that there is definitely a lot of value in the digital savviness of where we're moving, but there needs to be a blend of both the legacy way of doing things, and using digital tools to enhance some of the decision making processes that we're doing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, all right, thank you. Next, I wanted to think about employee autonomy and empowerment,
Mhm.
leadership. So let's think about what are some of the shifts towards empowering employees or encouraging independent decision-making and creativity, as opposed to the hierarchical, top-down decision-making process of the past.
So I personally think that I believe in guided autonomy, right? I believe in having folks, be autonomous in their decision, but it's a collaboration, right? So why conceptually do you think that this is the route to take? How do you think that it should be implemented, and how would you implement it? What are the roadblocks? And as a manager, how can I alleviate some of those roadblocks, right? So what is it that you're trying to do? Do you feel comfortable with the autonomy? Because I've noticed that a lot of times, particularly with early tenured individuals, they're taught the concepts, but not necessarily the processes, right? And the processes are where, that's where the rubber meets the road, right? Everything can sound good conceptually, but okay, how are we going to do this, right? And if you have a great idea, how are you going to get that from a concept to implementation? Mm-hmm. And I believe in guiding folks through that process. That's the role of an effective leader in my mind. How do you guide them through the process of, okay, I've got this great idea. How can we make this practical? Like, how can we make this live? And does this have meat? Right? Does this have meat behind it? So I think that's the role of a good leader. Like, helping people, guiding them through their autonomous thoughts, and yeah, being that mentor or coach.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I see this, it just struck me you remember the book In Search of Excellence? It's like 40 years old, I think now. And it was, and they made it into a short film which highlighted these employees and companies that were doing great things. But one of them was, I think it was a FedEx employee who had left the key to the FedEx box behind, and so he ended up renting a helicopter and getting this FedEx box back to so that the things could be delivered. And you talk about an example of employee empowerment. So this is 40 years ago, and of course, a lot of the noise back was, had my employees spent $25,000 like that, I probably would fire them, and other kind of responses of
Mhm.
social media would be very active with this, I think. But my point being that this has been a theme that's been around for a long time. We want employees to act with empowerment, to feel like to act as owners, and um, and bring more of their genuine selves. This is where I think again the heart comes into play.
Mhm.
Um, to feel like they can bring more of themselves and therefore more of their creativity and all of that we want in terms of being innovative and making innovative decisions. Uh, I think companies struggle a bit with the power piece of this, which is, how much of the power is actually shifting in the empowerment versus just sort of laying this as another thing for an employee to do. And I think we're working our way through that. Um, and I started with employees feeling really responsible for their career development, whether they're in a large company or not. I think most employees have figured out that that's really their responsibility. And the empowerment to me, it sort of starts there and then expands from there.
For me, I have back in the day, I would say, had a lot of frustration about not being empowered. And I guess being an adult educator, um, my thought as a leader has always been to empower and grow my team and giving them that autonomy and that empowerment um, gave them the critical thinking skills that I'm looking for in order for them to grow to wherever they want to grow. I mean, some folks want to grow to the top, others don't. But I always struggled in my career with not having any autonomy or empowerment. And so I think in a lot of ways, in some ways, that it kind of stifled my career and I had to take different directions to get around that because it was just I was bumping my head up against a brick wall. So, so today leaders, I think the new leadership, because in those, people grew up in organizations, they don't do that anymore. They don't grow up, wait your turn, you'll grow up, you'll get there. Well, even when I was coming through, I was impatient. I wanted to get it right away too. But I had all these stumbling blocks in front of me, and couldn't get the autonomy that I wanted. So that was a big struggle that I had to work through in my career. Okay.
When I first started out, Marilyn, the model was that you stay with a company for a long period of time,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
you do for them, they do for you, and I remember about 10, 15 years or so into my career, I was in a meeting in San Francisco with one of the startup companies, and there was a young man who was 25 years old, and he was apologizing for having been with the same company for the last 5 years. Like he was telling us, from a credibility standpoint, it isn't that I couldn't get a job anywhere else, and at that moment I realized, boy, this has changed significantly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely a shift in that mindset. And I know that we're gonna discuss it, but I feel like there in today's day and age, I think that a lot of people in my generation and early tenured individuals, they understand that a job is just that. It's a job. The concept of a career has really shifted, right? So my career are my skills, right? My career isn't necessarily the organization that I work for. My career is my skills, and that's a very it's a very new way of thinking, because we don't have the experience. We don't. I mean, a lot of times we don't have 30 years on this earth, let alone 30 years within an organization, right? So it's tough to have that, you know, that distant future perspective or mindset. But coming out of school, grad school, whatever it may be, you build these sets of skills, right? And your value to the organization is your set of skills, not necessarily your loyalty to the organization. And with what we've seen recently in some of the, in the tech space or the consulting space, the organization isn't necessarily going to be loyal to you, right? So why should you? I've seen situations where people were with an organization for 20, 30 years, and when times got rough for the organization, their loyalty shifted to the needs of the organization rather than the needs of the person, right? So I think that with folks my age seeing things like that, it's like why would I be loyal to an organization that doesn't necessarily always have the same loyalty towards
me? Okay. Next, I want to dive a little into diversity and inclusiveness. So I'm thinking about modern leadership styles that prioritize diversity and equity and inclusion in the workplace, and moving away from or beyond the homogeneous, often associated with traditional leadership structures. So what are your thoughts around how these leadership styles or leadership, say, prioritizes diversity and inclusion, or DEI?
John, you want to start that one, or you want me to
Yeah,
take
sure. I'll jump in and share my point of view, which I feel like is kind of what I've been told and what I've experienced, which is that diverse teams outperform homogenous teams. And I think there's a lot of research that kind of proves that out. Prioritizing diversity and inclusivity seems to be at the board level and then on through the executives. And so then they look at metrics like the number of diverse candidates that have been looked at for a position, the number of diverse hires, things that can be measured and tracked. And then below those levels, depending on how far those metrics get pushed into the organization, it still feels to me like it's up to kind of individual managers in terms of how they express and live out that belief about diversity, whether they believe it or how much they believe it, and how much they're willing to take risk and go outside their usual network. As a matter of fact, one of the last projects that I was working on was one to look at how people get staffed on projects. And what they were trying to do was create some agency for the employees to be able to raise their hand when they saw something coming along. And an important part of this was that the first identification of a candidate would be done anonymously. Because what happens in consulting, and I think to a large extent other large corporations, is people develop a kind of a posse or a team or a squad, and they travel with those people and they pull them in as they get promoted, and at consulting firms are certainly very much like that. So we're trying to break out of that kind of behavior pattern a bit and bring in people that are outside the network and use this anonymous staffing as a way to do that. It hasn't been implemented. They went into a different software for a solution, but in any case, I think I have a sense that's kind of the developing uh, culture, ethos, capability for organizations right now.
You, you know, John, now that you say that, when I think about my work, when I work with clients that may be going through transition, networking is a big thing. You know, rely on your network, work with your network. Um, when it comes to where you may, you know, probably land, 80% of the time it's going to be through your network. But how do we get these diverse networks working? Or how do we build these diverse networks? Because, like you said, typically the networks are going to be like people. So how do a person thinking about that, if you want to broaden your network from a diversity standpoint, how do I go about that? Because that's a thought that doesn't come, that kind of skips. It's sort of like, and even if I am, you know, in a diverse leadership, how much are you going to ask when it comes to, okay, we can do the numbers, we can invite me to the party, but you don't ask me to dance. That's what I always say. So that is something that just kind of light bulb moment for me. And talking to my clients when I talk about, you know, work your network, build your network, you know, on LinkedIn, you know, or socially, we have to broaden that. We have to understand to broaden that.
Well, and consider this, the difference between, so I went out and partly my consciousness was raised, um, the summer that really bad things were happening. And we had a CEO, Kelly Greer, who was terrific and really focused on equity. In fact, she was behind this new staffing, not staffing that I was talking about, but she she was very communicative and very empathetic and really raised the consciousness, I think, of the organization about it. And I went out and purposely connected with through LinkedIn, other EY employees of color. But think about the difference between that and a company saying, I want all of our executives to go out and connect, with 10 people of color. It's it's different how that happens. And I think that's part of the struggle with DEI is how do we activate it in a way that's true to ourselves and our employees in a way that doesn't feel so much top-down heavy.
Exactly. I think that, and I love Kelly. I definitely do. And I love Kelly because I think that she was authentic in her diversity efforts. It never came across as being, you know, as being forced. This is what she knew would be the right thing to do. Therefore, she did the activities to make sure that they happen. I think that's a lot of times, to both of you all's points. If there is diversity at the higher levels of the organization, it's diversity. It's face diversity rather than diversity of thought. It's a lot of homogeneousness, homogeneity in thought, but they bring in these figureheads who may look different, but they think the exact same way. I think that there is a value in diversity of thought. I think that there's a value in establishing to both of you all's points, in creating these diverse teams. There is a baseline of skills, right? A toolkit, if you will, of skills that everybody needs to have. But outside of that, come as you are. Put your little twist on it, right? There are things that need to happen, but the diversity of thought is where we really do get some innovative ideas, right? And that's definitely something that I will try to do in every role that I have from here forward. Just try to make sure that people have the baseline skills and you can actually get the work done at a basic level. But to what I was saying before about just guided autonomy, what's your diverse thought? How do you think that you can implement this thought? And what is it that you need in order to make in order to bring this into fruition.
We're just getting started in this conversation about old age versus new age leadership with our special guests. Stay tuned for part 2.